AI, accelerated cloud adoption, and hybrid work are fundamentally shifting how business gets done. The old way of securing your people, apps, and data doesn't work and scale anymore. To stay ahead, today's organizations need to reimagine their security and networking infrastructure with a cloud-first, unified SASE architecture. Join Palo Alto Networks and leading technologists from across the globe for SASE Converge 2023, a two-day virtual experience, November 15th through 16th, revealing how SASE, powered by advanced AI, can drive better security and networking outcomes. Register today at securityweekly.com/Palo Alto. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Adit Levine about service meshes, observability, and Nagios. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella, and it's just about time for the news. Because first, you can find us on Instagram now. Follow us for highlight reels, giveaway announcements, and more at Sec Weekly. Plus, I want to give a personal shout out to support your local B-Sides conferences. A local one for me is B-Sides SF, coming this May 4th and 5th, 2024, with the theme, You Can't Spell Dystopia Without AI, which also means you need a little bit of dyslexia in there, but I do like the spirit of it. I wanted to highlight it because their CFP closes very soon, January 8th. So check out bsidessf.org/CFP for more. They're also seeking sponsors, just like everybody is. So come be a sponsor of bsidessf.org or come be a sponsor of Application Security Weekly and get the best Application Security Weekly content you can. And with that, John, we have to justify this now. So there's some news that's happened this past week. And this is going to be the news that wraps up 2023 for us. So maybe there'll be a little bit of the micro and macro commentary here. But I wanted to start us off with, speaking of time, something old, Nagios. I have not come across Nagios in quite a long time. And NCC Group just did some research on it. And as you know, and I'll repeat for our listeners, I shy away from just the pure picking on a language for the sake of a language. Now, Nagios is in PHP, but I'm going to pick on it because it's in old school PHP rather than modern design patterns. And part of the reason for that is just two things that stood out to me. One, NCC Group gave an example of a command execution in a username, which is literally just an object with a pipe command through a tar command. It's just like old school. This is what, shell hacking looked like in the early 2000s, which Nagios probably dates back to early 2000s. Oh, yeah. So I was just hoping that, things had moved on from then.
Well, sometimes our listeners, I'm sure, have that experience of, they're listening to us or our weekly news show, and we talk about some new vulnerability, and they're like, "Oh, I've got that, and I need to go and patch it." Well, it turns out I have Nagios. I need to go patch. I'm not running Nagios, but I am running something called CheckMK at home, and CheckMK is a derivative of Nagios. They tried to solve a lot of the issues with it around scalability and configurability and the UI and some things like that. But it's still Nagios core underneath. I believe it's still a downstream package. So it's out there. It's still used. And the reason is, I go look probably every 10 to 16 months, somewhere around there, looking to see if there's something better out there. And there's Zabit and some other ones. And I think we might have even had one of them on the show at some point. But it works, and it's got great support and lots of plugins and things like that. So I understand while it's still around there. I completely agree. It needs to be redone in some new language. But as we've talked about before, good example, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay, well, now it's broke. So what are we going to do? So it looks like they've got some patches out for it. It's funny. This is going to be a PHP show because we've got another one of these too. It's there. It's one of the things also is it's usually run internally on an internal network. It's run by the ops team. They're not expecting anyone outside to use it or think about it. So in previous worlds where we had our little firewalled enterprise and no one had to touch anything or no one could touch anything, and that was our world. Right. They stayed there and they were happy with it. Versus now we're cloud-based, and that little circle of your firewall comes down to literally the instance, if not software on the instance. So your threat boundaries completely changed. So I think that I'm not justifying, but there's obviously work to be done and improvements to be made. But we'll see where it goes.
And I applaud you for not bringing in the word zero trust as you were describing that threat model.
We're not done yet.
The one thing, we're not done yet, but I did want to add to that too. We talked about last week another tool that had pulled in an abandoned project of tiny XML. One of the other things that NCC Group pointed out here was that the web shell basically was a backdoor into the system. It didn't have any authentication. And this web shell was also written in C. So here's PHP calling into some very unmemory safe C, but it's also this web shell is something that was, to quote, a large and complex application written in C that has not been updated in 4 years, and a release has not been made since 2016. So again, it points to that balance, as you said. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But how do we, we do need some going back to review what actually is broke or what should be updated here. Is there a better replacement?
Yeah. I'm the result of this conversation is people go be asking, why are you running this? But honestly, if you look at the plugin architecture for Nagios, there's very little by default authentication on either push or polling of those systems. You can go and, tighten down by IP, but come on, it's 2023. There's a lot of room for improvement as you were describing that. I wonder if one of the reasons people haven't looked at this closer is because people look at it and go, it's such Swiss cheese. Why would we bother actually putting time into research? And that sounds super damning. But I think that's really sort of at least partially the state of monitoring in this world, right? It's I've got some Cisco switches and just getting the SNMP data off them, configuring that so it's useful and actually that the system can take, it's a significant pain in the butt. So, here's things getting better.
Here's the things getting better. And one final thing to add on that is, OpenSSF, we talked about, they have their list of 500 applications that they were looking at. What are the most used applications? And now making me think, I have to go back and look where Nagios fell on that list because, as you are pointing out rightly, there's a difference between this should be fixed versus should this be fixed right now, because there's that opportunity cost of something else. And as you mentioned, there's other PHP code out there. So let's make sure we get through a couple other articles. What's the other PHP code that caught your eye this time?
The one that caught my eye is in pfSense. So this is, for those who don't know, it's a tool we're talking about today, which I'm not running. But pfSense is an open source firewall, which is used in several commercial products. It's sort of, and when I say firewall in this particular instance, I'm talking not just about, IP tables on the Linux side, but also how do you configure and manage that on top, because that's sort of the part that most people interact with and care about. Anyways, pfSense is written in PHP. And the fine folks over at Sonar pointed one of their tools at it, and it came back and said, hey, there's some cross-site scripting and some command injection. And it'd be interesting. I know I want to go back and read the NCC article, because the sense I got from the Sonar story is literally what I just said. They took their Sonar source, Sonar Cloud, and pointed it at the source tree, and it found things. Okay, they make a story out of it. For those who don't understand how static analysis works, they have some visuals and they talk through how source and taint in sync, tainted sources and sinks work if you're doing application security, like running a static scanner. So I think from that point of view, it's good for some folks maybe to take a scan and come up to speed. But for those of us who have used these tools, the sense I get is, like I said, they pointed at it and scanned it, which makes me go, okay, well, why weren't these found before? And then that comes back to the Nagios story too, right? Like it's for the, how would I say, for the bluntness of the vulnerabilities which NCC found, it makes, was that the result of a line-by-line code scan, or did they, point the tool at it? And again, why hasn't someone else done that? So that's, I don't know, it's a bit of a head-scratcher, but also, I'll leave it at scratching heads for right now.
Yeah, and for me, it comes into, I don't have the verbosity of the Kinsella scale, but for me, this comes down to just a dead simple type of vuln. How did this get missed? One of the reasons it gets missed, I will assert, is that the tooling, whether it's the compiling or interpreter, depending on your language, doesn't have a good feedback for the users. And you and I actually think both caught on some tooling that doesn't necessarily fall explicitly into AppSec, but I believe has some great AppSec contributions. And honestly, what I think a good future of AppSec should look like. So my article was from Go. They have a capability now to find dead code. And finding dead code is useful because a great AppSec approach is to reduce your attack surface, just reduce complexity and don't maintain what you don't have to maintain. Plus, I love my D&D references or just in general, and they call this vampire code. So I'm going to have to call dead code vampire code now. That was pretty fun. But that's what the Go world is doing. And there's also other stuff going on in developer land, if you will.
So developer land. It's funny, when I think vampire code, I would expect it to be like taking resources, like sucking from the system somehow. But okay,
they're describing that actually as like taking developer time, taking the mental overhead of maintenance. So that's why, the metaphor actually holds up pretty well.
Got it. So I like that they've done this. Well, it's I don't know about you. If I'm coding and a static analysis tool tells me there's dead code, that's usually an annoyance. I mean, it's dead. Either I can remove it and get rid of it, which, okay, cool, thanks for letting me know. But possibly it's something I've left there for future use or for something else, and like I don't need something squawking at me about it. So it by itself isn't a vulnerability, I don't think. It's not being used. So
yeah, absolutely right. And they point out like it can be helpful for broadening test cases. For example, did you get coverage out of your test case? Because they do say how demonstrate to point that. And they were talking about it from the perspective of one of my favorite topics, Mr. Kinsella, refactoring. After you've refactored code, did you succeed? Or did you miss something? Or did the refactoring actually make it so that there is some old code that's gone away? So that's kind of how that's a perspective I'll say, while still acknowledging I don't want my IDE yelling at me for the sake of yelling at me.
Yeah, and then the next thought there is, so it's two more on this one. One, is this good enough to tell me that the only thing using my code is the unit test? And then the second part is, and I've seen this before, 6 months time, if I'm setting up a Go project and I'm trying, okay, I want my best practices in place. I want to like have the right parameters in there. So it's like, no debug, all the other things you're going to do for production code. Where do I find that list? And if I find that list, is it going to have this dead code test on there? Or is there like a default set of like, here's a unit test you could be running? All those sort of like back to sort of the coding tooling setup for secure by default. Like does that thing exist, right? Like, can I like go and get like a distribution of, for a while there was some folks doing distributions or custom distributions for Eclipse. I don't know if they still are out there, but can I get like a distribution of VS Code that has like all these tools like right there automatically going to work for me, so I don't have to set that stuff up? That'd be pretty neat. But yeah, let's move on. The tool which I found, again, this is not purely AppSec related, but it could be, is Cling is out at version 1.0, and this is an interactive C++ interpreter. So partially you can probably hear from my voice, I'm listing this just out of pure jest and entertainment of like, what would someone use this for? And as you were talking a little earlier, I was thinking like, hey, if this is an interpreter, does that mean I can write C++ Unix scripts?
Oh no.
And like, right. So you start getting some really fun ideas with this. Like, what do you use this for? But I'm positive there's, if you need to test out a little bit of code and you don't want to get something go through compiler, all that type of thing, you're just playing. I could see this being useful. So, yeah, listeners, please play with this. It's exactly what I said. It's a interactive interpreter for C++. Tell us how the pointers work in it. Don't shoot yourself in the foot. Don't remote code inject or buffer overflow your machine. But I'd love to hear what folks do with this.
Yeah, I'm curious. Can it help with exploit development or in any way? Does anybody do exploit development in C++? Who knows? Yeah. As John said, let us know. There's also, speaking of like hackers, exploits, there's some really fun, how did I phrase it? Hacking the anti-fix measures code to fix trains. And this is a really neat article, once again, from 404 Media. So one of my new favorites to follow. So I'll give them a shout out. Go subscribe to them. And here are similar to the John Deere story from Sick Codes that we've covered from their presentation at I think actually they were both at Black Hat and DEF CON, but they're talking about DRM tractors, John Deere, etc. Here are trains. So, John, we've covered plane, trains, and automobiles this entire year. But they're talking about the hackers who are identifying to the train owners that say, hey, our train is bricked. It won't move. And it just so happens that it won't move and can't be fixed unless an official, blessed train fixer, to use the official term, obviously, is within a specific geofence location as well. That was one of the neat things, is that when they were reverse engineering this, they were pointing down to where this, what they call the workshop detection system was saying, is this being worked on by an approved location, which would be ostensibly the approved workshop, or not? And this, I think, is the kind of really positive, cool hacking that we would love to see, at least that I would love to see throughout 2024 as well. So great article, great research.
So I saw this during the week. I'm glad you brought it in. For some reason, it didn't click in my brain to add it to our queue. But one of the thoughts, so there's a few thoughts when this came to my mind. It sounds like the local, the train service hired these folks to get these trains to work, which in a way means they were hiring at least gray hat hackers to, get the stuff going. And then, so once the manufacturer found out what was going on, it sounds like they shut that down again. But yeah, I don't know. It's so, and I don't think I got a sense of what the backstory is. I think I can guess of like either there was too much cost or else the contract expired and they couldn't use their trains, or there's a story there I missed. But I'm very happy to see it. I'm curious about the overall story around it, but also is this part of some form of a future? Probably not in the US because they get their pantsuit off. But I'm with you. I want to see something like this happen. I don't think once you own something like this should happen, that you can just stop using it, or be stopped from using it. But it's the philosophy is still sort of making me head scratch again. My phrase for today.
Yeah, and I think that's a great homework for me to bring in some more of that background to talk about. There's a meta conversation that you're touching on here that rather than be an influencer, I will just wait until I read about that and bring an informed opinion on this topic.
That'll be on our new show, Security Philosophy Weekly.
Security Philosophy Weekly. Well, one of the things in a philosophy for security, John, is scoring systems. How bad do you think a vulnerability is? And Zoom has entered the chat with their vulnerability impact scoring system version 1.0.0. They got 2.0s in there. So, but in this more, I just wanted to highlight maybe a couple things. Again, this is sort of like we've seen Zoom do a trajectory from getting beat up, possibly quite rightly, for a couple insecure designs, and then hiring a bunch of AppSec folks, security folks, improving their security presence, infrastructure, and then also now contributing back to the community with something that they're highlighting, a scoring system that, because clearly existing scoring systems weren't working for them or didn't, scratch that particular itch that they have. And I'm picking on Zoom because they published this, is available this week, but I doubt they're alone. I think every company I've ever seen internally wants to have their own version of CVSS plus this extra risky bit. And I don't think it's ever succeeded. I don't know how you've seen that happen.
Well, first, I want to gently correct you. This is actually revision 1.2 of version 1.0.0 of the specification.
Curse you, revisions.
We're baiting ourselves here, or Mike's baiting me, or both of the above with this. I mean, we've, it's another top 10 in a way. Not literally, but sorry, just going through the list of names. I don't understand why this exists. Oh, hey, there's equations, there's math. They're using like Greek symbols. It must be like serious. There's so many of these things out there. Did we really need another one? Let's see sorry, as you can tell, I'm giving this is, I saw this before the show, but it's still getting my first read. Zoom owns all rights and interests on Vis. Great. That's cool. introduction. I'm looking to see, is there like, and this is sort of, anytime we see one of these things, this is sort of how you do it, or like an open source project, like, why does this exist?
Yes, and you're being a wonderful audience stand-in here, because one of the things I wanted to lead us to is sort of like, why does this exist? I hinted that they have like their own itch that they needed to scratch,
but
this doesn't really, what is that itch? And we've seen like BugCrowd, for example, has a similar rating system for just to help guide with bug bounties, and is how impactful is this? But that has a reason for existing, in the sense of, here's the $500 bounty versus the $1,000 bounty type of thing, and it needs that granularity of what they see. But I don't see this here, and I guess maybe
here's an interesting sentence in the intro. While the industry standard common vulnerability scoring system, they don't say which version, is used to subjectively evaluate vulnerability reports primarily from an attacker's perspective and assumes the reasonable worst case impact, this focuses on measuring responsibly demonstrated impact from a defender's perspective.
Sounds. We'll let the silence speak. There's EPSS. There's CVSS4 as their BTS. Yes, excuse us. I also just wanted to squeeze in a BTS reference for all my K-pop fans out there. But so let's make fun of something else. This is we'll take our gloves off a little bit. MITRE,
next,
they have attack, they have defend, they have all of their elite speak projects, which are useful. They get a taxonomy, they get ways of organizing how to talk about how attackers, how threats attack organizations. Do you have countermeasures for these categories? They've got a new one, John. This is actually possibly going into our 6 months later category, one called Embed. And this is, of course, EMB3D spelling, as a threat model for critical infrastructure embedded devices. So this is more of embedded devices in our OT land. These aren't our typical consumer type of IoT devices. We'll be curious to see it. Kudos to them for making all these, these elite project names, because obviously it's working. It got me to include it and talk about it. So I'm guilty here, but I don't know that I can't really say much more about an announcement, since we don't have something to talk about. So I don't know if there's something that you're looking forward to, perhaps from this particular threat model.
I'm wondering. So this is going on the 6 month later list, because what I'm curious about here. Is this the right organization to define the standard? And from the point of view of, I've been not knocking MITRE to do all sorts of great things, have for many decades, but the ways you're describing, as I'm thinking through it, industrial IoT and sort of larger megacorps would be sort of at least partially consumers of this. Would they be looking for a spec to come from MITRE or NIST or ISO or a European org? It's sort of interesting to think about for me, like, okay, is that really the right? And I know sometimes folks outside the US will consume our standards.
And they do have some industry participants helping with them. So,
I'm looking for an excuse.
But it's still a good point.
99 red balloons, but
oh man,
I know they got close. They didn't quite set us up. I'm just going to file this one away and come back to it. Yeah, 6 months later.
Mm-hmm. So I still want to get that Luftballon reference in there. In that 6 months later category, real quick, Cloud Security Alliance also has a new effort about AI security. I included just their announcement as well as an article from Decipher that where I came across it. Again, I think this is going to have to be in our 6 months later. We'll also try to get Caleb Sema on the show, talk to him, Caleb's and because he's chairing this. So that will be pretty neat to see what new and different things he's up to.
So I missed this, unfortunately. CSA had their September up here in Seattle in, was that September? It must be September. What do you know? Time flies. And they had a Friday all-day think tank on AI that was actually going to be around forming this. And everyone who went to it said it was amazing. I was on a plane somewhere. I don't remember where, but so this is, I didn't realize when I saw the Decipher, I didn't realize it was a CSA thing. There's some interesting folks doing some really neat stuff. Obviously, this is a very sort of hot and sexy area right now. But yeah, so that's for folks who are curious about the space. That I would give that one a thumbs up.
So, and we will check back in 6 months. So speaking of D&D, we talked about some vampire code. Let's talk about some 5G ghouls. This was neat to me because yay, protocol analysis. So 5Ghoul, as the branded vulnerability or set of vulnerabilities is described, it's a nice introduction. If the authors go through the effort of saying, here are how 5G networks, here are how some of the protocols actually work, so that they can explain what it was they found. And so it's just it's nice and informative for that. So you can get a good background of just what are we even talking about here? Because I think, you might get some TCP IP questions and some job interview types of things, but you'll probably less likely get some 5G protocol questions unless you're going straight into something specifically relevant to that. But those comments aside, a lot of this mostly boils down to denial of service attacks, as well as one or two downgrade attacks. So you can go from 5G to 4G or one of the lower numbers. And the reason I highlight that is that you start to lose the benefits of encryption at those 4G and below. So is some utility in there. This is a nice write-up because they also are not hyperbolic about things. They go out of their way to explain what actually is necessary or is not necessary. So they say you don't need it. It's not something like you need the victim's SIM card or you need something like very secret that they're just going to hand wave away and then, by the way, the sky is falling. They explain, what's not necessary, what is necessary. That if you have a freely available app like Cellular Pro, which they reference, give a link to. This is one of the software defined radio, not the networks that we talked about with the D to N in the last segment. This is it's mostly a way for consumers, you and I, researchers, to get into. But as I continue to talk, which possibly just giving John a chance to read up on the article, I'm not sure if he needs more time, but I'll go ahead. Is that near the end, what stood out to me, I think what might be helpful for all of our listeners is they talk about the challenges or reflecting on this work, meaning that identifying crashes, which they're trying to do, can be kind of difficult in this area. And this is the general problem with fuzzing that OpenSSF is running into. There's also just with 5G networks, this type of networking, there's a lot of debugging support that's difficult, and they do talk about how to test this at scale. So a lot of these vulns just look like dead simple vulns in terms of just from a protocol perspective of not looking, not validating length fields, things like that, or not having good implementation controls on the state machine. But they seem, it seems brittle. And it seems like, how do you make this less brittle so that more researchers can look at this? And that is what I'm going to try and summarize this on. So, John, I need to take a breath because that was a lot of talking. Let's hear from someone else.
I was enjoying that. I'm sure our listeners were too. So for me, what's interesting about this, it's a really neat write-up. But compared to where we were, say, 5-10 years ago, if we were thinking about doing this with 3G or 4G systems, it has become so much easier, mainly because of SDRs.
Yeah.
And I think they're sort of, as you were wrapping up what I was thinking, so this is, I think we covered briefly this year on the show, satellite hacking is now available to us because we're literally able to go out to some of the cloud providers and say, hey, I want to borrow a base station. I want to rent a base station for a few hours. Don't mind me. And we're going to probably start heading in this direction with this stuff, I'm sure, at some point. But part of what's interesting around it is those SDMs, SDRs, they're still coming down in price. They're not cheap. So they're not around here. I've got a few for different reasons. And some, they tend to be an SDR, while it's so software-defined radio, it sounds simple like software-defined networks. But what you start seeing happening is there's a lot of hardware limitations on it. So, okay, sometimes if you want something cheap, it might just work on a particular band, like the SDR, the RTLs for like TV tuners. That's used for a lot of things, but that's a very specific frequency band, and they usually can't transmit. Then if you want to transmit, you have to go over to another one, but then usually the ranges become smaller. You might need a license to use them legally. And there's some interesting, more expensive, fancy ones. Like I think what they're using in this article, I didn't look up the actual part, but the box looks familiar. Those start getting, they're just expensive enough that I'm not going to go out and get one to play with it. So there's still a bit of a barrier there, and hopefully that'll keep coming down. It's the chipsets aren't cheap. The designing of those boards aren't cheap, because usually as you want to go to different frequency ranges, you have to start doing frequency isolation and things like that on the board. But still, it's the thing is, at the end of the day, if I want to go and play this, break out the credit card and get serious about it, and it's in the space, I'd say for a few grand you can get to this, and that's interesting, possibly scary for some folks. We know that there are commercial products only available to law enforcement to do this type of thing. So what would an individual do with it? I mean, we don't care as much about tracking, but like sort of where they're going this article, if you want to actually be more malicious and attack, it's very within the realm. So fun little reading on Christmas Eve or some eggnog.
Yeah, and they link to a GitHub repo with some additional research and also some of the hardware they use. And so, for example, one of the devices was in the $2,000 range. So just to give a sense, and so accessible, yes, but not on a podcast host budget. So unfortunately, we're going to have to hang out and see what DEF CON villages are playing around with and bringing this kind of hardware over the summer.
We need that big Paul Security Weekly money.
Speaking of money, once again, thank you for queuing up a great transition there, a segue to software behind crypto hardware wallet hit by supply chain attack. Some miscreants are out there, John. Tell us about miscreants.
Damn those kids. I brought this in mostly from the point of, we've talked a lot about SBOM and some of these type of things over the year, but here's sort of a solid example of an attack where someone managed to get access to the source, put some of their stuff in there, and then the result was not as bad as it could have been, but still fairly bad. So what's going on here? Ledger is they make a hardware-based crypto wallet. So for those folks into the crypto space that worry about their coins being stolen, what a lot of them will do is actually put the actual crypto codes onto I'm going to get people. I can feel the emails coming right now from me being loose with my words. But they're going to put their coins onto that hardware device. So the theory being, when you unplug it, the USB, when you unplug it from computer, put it wherever you put those type of things, it's your money. No one else is going to get it. So as part of this system, what Ledger, the company, has done is they've been expanding this out, is they've got a library which allows integration with other software packages. And, the cool kids are doing this. So it's written in JavaScript with NPM. Well, I know NPM, I'm presuming JavaScript. And it turns out what happened here was some malicious users phished a previous employee, not a current employee, a previous employee. So this is where things get interesting. They phished him successfully. They managed to, through that access, upload a modified version of that NPM library. So then when that was consumed by end users, when they were updating their software or what have you, or it could be some of these would be included into a third-party thing, right? So another integration is using this, then a client goes and downloads it. That code starts then draining from their wallet into some other location. We call that stealing. So I think that's the overall use case. I think there's some back on the head scratcher thing. How exactly did a previous employee have access to this code still? That's something for us to think about. But yeah, so that's a legit experience of someone actually doing a targeted attack for a software supply chain. And I thought that would be, it gives us a little more meat, a little more something solid behind some of these stories of what we're talking about, a little less of the, ooh, horrible, but hey, this actually happens. And then also, we don't talk too much about OPSEC on here, but one of your things is someone leaves your company, make sure you turn off their access. And like, if I leave a company, I'll go to them and say, can you make sure that my access is turned off? And it's for that level of, if something happens, I don't want to be blamed on accident, but also, hell, maybe one of my systems would get hacked. And at that point, the last thing I want is someone who I don't have a financial relationship anymore, whether I left on good or bad terms, whatever, and I'm suddenly causing them issues. That's not cool. So I don't know the whole story there. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe there's a bigger story. Maybe there's still just a contributor on the open source side. But yeah.
Yeah. And I think, these in the world of the cryptocurrency, it does help. It is helpful to show here is very direct, consequential impact because there is money involved. Some of it's funny money of tokens, and who knows whether it exists or not. But some of it is actual value, and so that's helpful to just reinforce the message. It does tie into an article I want to go into detail that I pulled about from Microsoft, talking about how OAuth is abused or misused, typically post-compromised. For example, if an employee leaves, you should revoke their access, and that means all of their OAuth connections as well. There was also some research, which I was scrambling to find, from some researchers who were identifying that in the Google Workspace that you can offboard an account, but there was a couple ways. There was a nuance in a way that offboard might be incomplete. But that's the most I can say without getting into just pure, too unfortunate speculation and misrepresenting it. So, listeners, going to have to go back to the show notes, and I'll update them after this. But John, we're have to wrap up our episode of news. We have to wrap up the episode for the year. It's been a really fun 2023 with all of the articles we've gone to. And as you know, you've been patiently sitting through all of the interviews where every time I ask our guests, describe AppSec in 3 words. So now, with whatever type of fanfare that we can muster for this, and a dramatic drum roll and trumpets and who knows what else, I need to ask you, John Kinsella, how would you describe AppSec in 3 words?
Put me on the spot. So I'm going to have a little bit of fun with this.
Please, yes.
And I've got 5 lead-ins, a little bit of funny haha, and I'm probably going to trigger some of our listeners. Then I'll get to what I think the real one is. So I'll start with patch it already, which you're already starting to see a theme here. But let's keep going. I thought this one was just for you. Modern directory traversal. So we've had these, but we're still having them in modern time. Next one's a little snarky. Not a webinar.
Thank you.
Keep going. Zero WAF patch. I'm looking for the bingo words here. One more on the fake side, which is patch not pray. I think that's a pretty good one, but that's still. Okay. And then the one I'll say seriously, and I think some of those have some serious notes in them, but for me, serious on the year is use the tool. And by that, whether it's, we talked about in the news just now, that some of the tools built into Go or whatever compiler or software system ecosystem you're using, or maybe it's something built into your IDE, or maybe it's something that's open source, maybe it's something that's commercial. But I think if we, take a step back and look at any of the stories we're talking about, 90% of them.
Any?
There's almost every one of those. I'd say for that 90%, they could have been prevented by some sort of tool, which are at this point in time within our reason to be able to find and get and use and make it part of our tool chain, another tool. But it's, and I was a little ranty last time, but I think again, if we had these tools, and I think a lot of times we have the tools, but we're not using the tools. So that's my AppSec in 3 words.
I love it. And I'm going to have to just say, I love your list, but overall, I'm disappointed that my 3 words, and no one ever came up with this, is that AppSec in 3 words is Application Security Weekly. But clearly you can see I have a bias. But yes, that was a fun list. We're going to throw that into some more fun word clouds, and we'll talk about that throughout 2024. But listeners, just as a teaser, we're also going to start asking our guests something different, and it's not going to be something dumb like VI versus Emacs. That is old and cliche. That's done with. I'm sorry. We'll come up with something for you. We'll come up with something good buzzwordy for you, John.
That's why I'm here.
Yep. But that does wrap us up for 2023. I just want to say thank you once again, John, for joining us. This has been fun as always.
And also, I don't say it often enough, but thank you, Mike, and for our listeners for listening, and for the rest of the production team we have behind here. Security Weekly is part of a larger organ, but still, there's a lot of stuff which happens for these shows to get put together. Mike puts a ton of time into these. I think most of our listeners probably know from your intros, which have been pretty amazing this year. So thank you, and thanks to all our listeners, and looking forward to the new year.
Indeed. Thanks you once again, John. Please do subscribe, give us a like, check out the show notes. And speaking of AppSec, check out data from Diamond to Ace. Plus, as John said, a shout out to everyone who helps put this together, especially Renee, Sam, Tom, and Tyson. Extra thanks to John for sitting through all my intros, and to Akira for dropping in when she can. Come on back, Akira. We'll see you in lots in 2024. And everyone else, we'll see you next year on Application Security Weekly.